Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining MPI's National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy for this webinar titled Overcoming WIOA's Barriers to Immigrant and Refugee Adult Learners. My name is Margie McHugh, and I'm the Director of the National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy, and I will be introducing and moderating today's event. Before we get started, I have some important logistical information to share. You can see it up there on the screen. You'll find it easy to find the slides and audio from today's webinar on our website. You can see the web address there. If you have any problems accessing the webinar, please email that events@migrationpolicy.org address that's being followed regularly by our communications team, or you can simply call the number that you see there for assistance. Also, throughout the entire webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A function on the right of the screen. It's actually pretty helpful to us if you write in your questions as soon as you think of them, because it also helps us just order the questions for the Q&A period. So definitely, please write as you think of your questions. You can either use that Q&A function or you can send an email to us at events@migrationpolicy.org. So now, moving on, I want to say I am really delighted that we're joined today by three speakers who bring a range of deep expertise and experience to our discussion of these issues. They are Charles Kamasaki from the National Council of La Raza, Paula Schrieffer from Spring Institute for Intercultural Learning, and Art Ellison from the National Council of State Directors of Adult Education, and also the New Hampshire Education Department, where he's the lead for Adult Education Services. I will introduce each of them more fully before they speak, but for now, as part of setting the context for the webinar, I thought I'd briefly point to some of the ways that adult education and training issues have been a focus of our work across a number of diverse issue areas, just as part of making a broader point about how essential these services are to the successful integration of immigrants and refugees, as well as their children, who now total almost 80 million U.S. residents. So, for example, some of you on the call know us through our research and capacity building work that focuses on early childhood education and care issues. While much of that work is focused on the needs of young dual language learners, it also focuses on their parents' needs for cultural and systems navigation skills, and also for language and literacy skills, and the lack of programs that are available to provide these. Also, within that issue area, we have a big focus on the large share of immigrant workers in this field who have access to integrated education and training services that would help them to stay in and advance in that area of work. So just even outwardly an issue area that looks like it wouldn't involve adult education and training, we find that these issues are really deeply interwoven with them. Similarly, in the work that we're doing looking at 16 to 26-year-old youth, young adults, we published several times on the strengths and weaknesses of different state and local systems in supporting these young adults in earning diplomas and degrees they need in order to make a family sustaining wage and move forward to successful careers. Again, adult education and training systems, what sort of policies they operate under, what sort of funding they have, figure critically in the integration of these young adults. And then directly in adult education and training, a number of you on the call have been our partners in the community consultation sessions that we conducted last year in 7 states to provide input to the Department of Education as it put together a national action plan for meeting adult education needs. Many of the voices that we heard during those sessions and in the numerous recommendations that we put forward, we heard resoundingly about the urgent crisis in the availability of adult education and training services and for immigrants and refugees. And then finally, I'll just say that these issues were also a key focus of the E Pluribus Unum Prizes program that we ran until recently and that we'll be publishing on in the coming months. And many of you are also connected to the work we and others have been involved in seeking creation of a White House Office on New Americans that would improve governance of integration issues or as we say here, create brain circuitry at the federal level for addressing these issues. So to us, it's abundantly clear in all of these different areas of work that adult education and training services are the foundation upon which the linguistic, economic, and civic integration that so many of these efforts seek for immigrants and refugees will need to be built. So we figure we're kind of preaching to the choir on this call in the sense of that we don't have to convince you of the centrality of these services, but just here are a few quick data points that would provide you and provide this conversation with a little bit more context, and they're drawn from an analysis we'll be releasing in mid-October. So first, just thinking in terms of the potential overall need for adult education and English for speakers of other languages or ESL services, we know that there are 19.8 million limited English proficient immigrants over the age of 16 in the U.S. And by the way, when I say immigrants throughout this call, we mean immigrants and refugees, all foreign-born individuals. So these LEP immigrants represent 87% of the total 22.7 million LEP adults in the U.S. Then still keeping with the need for adult education services, there are 11.4 million immigrant adults ages 19 and over in the U.S. who have less than a high school diploma or equivalent, and they represent more than 1/3 of the 32 million U.S. adults who lack a high school diploma and are nearly 3 times as likely as their U.S.-born counterparts to not have a high school diploma or equivalent. So adult education funds meant to serve these two populations serve only 3% of all of those in need in a given year, and of course the need for these services is replenished year after year. And then specifically, that last point that you see on the slide with regard to workforce training services, which are more or less a separate funding stream, or I should say definitely a separate funding stream. These workforce training services also serve a very small slice of the overall population in need, and more importantly, I guess, for purposes of our call today, only 1.5% of those served by these funds in recent years were limited English proficient, which is a fairly shocking number given that the foreign-born represent such a high share of low-skilled workers.